On this week's podcast, I'm very privileged to have some dear friends on. And with the theme of Valentine's Day, we're going to be talking about just some keys to having a vibrant and wonderful marriage. And I feel very privileged to have some friends that will have been married for over 60 years. And it's just really amazing thing. And in fact, they'll be celebrating their 65th anniversary coming up. One thing about real estate is it is about buying a house and raising your family, but most importantly, it's really about having really a healthy and vibrant and wonderful marriage. And in the book of Proverbs, in the Bible, it talks about to seek wisdom. And so today, I wanted to seek some wisdom on how to have a wonderful marriage. And so today's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to ask some questions, and some of you posted some questions to ask them, and we'll be doing that. So without further ado, I want to welcome my friends Myron and Ardys Schurpheim, and thank you so much for doing this.
You're welcome.
Yeah, this is wonderful. So have some fun questions for you. So first question is, tell us about when and where you guys first met.
We first met in second grade, and I'll kind of let Ardys carry on from there.
Yes, we did. We have a unique story because his grandfather bought land from my grandfather in 1916.
Okay.
So our mothers grew up as children in both of those families, wow. And they were classmates, they were friends, they were neighbors, and we have the great compatibility of growing up in the same environment, the same community, and as it turned out, I lived on one side of town, he lived in town, and then my parents brought, after they established their family, they bought land close to Kensington, Minnesota, so I had to transfer from country school to town school, and second grade is when I first laid eyes on this guy, I guess, and I liked him right at the start. I'll have to admit that.
Oh, wow.
So I think I've really, all through school, I had my eye on him.
What Ardys didn't tell you was that she was a first grader in country school, but she had learned so much that when she moved into town school, they put her in second grade.
Oh. So Ardys, you caught Ardys's eye way back in second grade. When did you notice Ardys? Were you in second grade as well, or?
Well, we were a small class, and I noticed her every day she was there, but we didn't get serious till quite a bit later.
Yeah. So when did you guys start seeing each other or get more serious, would you say?
I think when we got into high school, I began to notice certain things. She had a notebook with names of boys on it, and there was one name that was a lot bigger than my name, and that caused me a little concern. And I remember specifically in English class, we sat in the front seats side by side, so I could look over there, and that kind of bothered me.
Well, our first date was as seniors in high school. We didn't have dances. We had banquets when we were seniors and juniors and seniors, and so he asked me to go to the junior senior banquet when we were seniors. Mm-hmm. So that was really our first official date. But like I said, we saw each other at school every day, and the thing that kind of prompted that was his father died when he was a senior in high school, early on in the senior year, and that changed a lot of things for him. So he was in Boy Scouts, he was in basketball, he had to go to work, and after his father died, so he was very busy and didn't really have time for girls. Mm-hmm. So I was quite surprised when I was asked to go to the junior senior banquet with him.
Wow.
So
what did your daily life look like when you started working? Were you working before and after school, or?
I worked at the post office. I got a job And I just, in a small town, I put the mail out in the morning, then went to school, went down in the afternoon or at noon actually, and covered for the postmaster when he went to lunch.
Yeah.
And then I closed up the post office in the evening. And then I had a second job that came up. Our banker had gotten in trouble with loans, so there was an investigation going on, and I was hired to go through reams and reams of files, and I could do that until 10, 11 at night, and
Wow.
that was another job. And then on weekends, sometimes I worked at a gas station
Wow.
pumping gas.
Yeah.
In those days, we pumped the
Yeah.
gas.
Yeah.
I would like to say three things that I admired about him
Yeah.
was his character, his personality, and his work ethic.
Yeah.
Those things were very important to me in choosing a mate, and
Yeah.
he had all three, and I saw those all through high school,
Yeah.
all through grade school.
Yeah.
He did well in his studies at school, and always cheerful.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of a love at first sight type thing from
Yeah.
second grade on.
Yeah. Yeah.
I could elaborate a little bit. When my father died, he died of a massive heart attack. And I was a senior in high school. It happened in October. Our neighbor lady walked in, came up to me in the class and said, "You're needed at home." And I had a younger sister, 8 years younger than I was. We picked her up at one of the lower grades, and then my recollection is we didn't say a word. We walked the 4 blocks to our home, and I knew that there was something bad had happened, and I walked in, and by then the neighbors had laid my father out in the bed, and he was in his work clothes, hands folded, and he had passed away. And that changed the dynamic of our lives at all. My older brother, only brother, was actually in Japan with the Army of Occupation, and we were unable to get him home, and the times were kind of tough.
Yeah.
So it did change the dynamic of what I probably would have done otherwise, but everything worked out for the best.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, to hear that. That'd be so hard, but it did work out. Like you said, it worked out for the best. And
It worked out.
yeah.
It did mean that from that time on, though, there was very little opportunity to be together
Yeah.
because he was always gone. I went to one college, he went to another,
Mm-hmm.
had to go to work in the summertime. So basically, the only time we saw each other was an occasional weekend when
Yeah.
he'd come home.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a courtship by letter, basically.
Oh, wow. So you guys were staying in touch?
We were
writing
staying in
letter-
touch, but
writing
we were
letters.
writing letters.
Yeah.
2 letters a week.
Wow. So you'd write 2 and you'd write 2, or
Pretty
And then
much.
they'd kind of meet on the way. And
Yeah.
So we really did have a courtship by letters because we
Yeah.
really were never in the same place at the same time long enough for other than an occasional date, but we had known each other so well because of the fact that we were in the same community, in the same school,
Mm-hmm.
not the same churches. He went to a town church, I went to a country church,
Oh,
but nevertheless, there was just so much that we knew about each other that we knew early on that we were meant for each other.
Yeah.
our separation actually started the first summer after we graduated from high school. I got a job on a railroad extra gang out of Chicago, working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week for 94 cents an hour.
Oh, wow.
And at the time, that was good pay. But I was gone for the summer, and then when I did get home for a couple of days, she went to one college, I went to another. So we began another period of separation.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that was unique at that time, and it was not necessarily unique for us alone, but I didn't have a car, but very few college students had cars. And since we were separated by about 150 miles, we didn't see each other very often, except at vacation time.
Mm-hmm. How? So when during this kind of period where you're working a lot, going to college, when did you go from courtship to engagement? How did that go? How did you propose, or how did that? Yeah.
I finished college. I graduated from the University of Minnesota with a degree in dentistry.
Uh-huh.
The morning that I graduated, I was sworn into the Air Force. And then I had to go for what consisted of basic training for about 3 months. And when I came back for about a 2-day visit, I came home, and I'll let Ardys tell you about our engagement.
Yeah.
Well, we were dressed up, of course. He asked me out, of course, and always in those days we dressed up, and we were going to go to dinner, but on the way we went to the highest point in Minnesota, east of the Mississippi. Is that right? West of the Mississippi? Anyway. And we climbed that little mountain, and on the top of a rock up there, he proposed to me.
Oh.
Standing on the rock.
It was a memorable evening, I tell you.
And then we went to dinner at Fergus Falls, Minnesota.
Oh. So, what was the most memorable thing on your wedding day? What do you say?
I probably should fill in here a little bit.
Oh, sure.
I spent a year on active duty at Great Falls, Montana, Malmstrom Air Force Base.
Mm-hmm.
She came out to visit once while I was there, but there was another period of almost a year separation.
Oh, wow.
And halfway through my 2-year tour, I came home in June. The wedding had been planned. I was not a part of the planning because I was gone, basically. And that's when our wedding was.
Wow.
We had a wedding on Sunday afternoon because we were in a farming community, and the farmers all had to do their work on Saturday, so and the weekdays. So we had a Sunday afternoon wedding.
Mm.
And the most memorable thing about it, I guess, was just the excitement of planning and the expectation of the day. I think probably one of the special things was I like red roses, and so on Friday before the wedding we drove to Minneapolis. We bought 20 dozen red roses for $1 a dozen, and Saturday and Sunday we arranged them in vases and had them as the background for our wedding, and that was very, very impressive and very noticeable. My colors were dark green, red roses, and white.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I bet just the, kind of your courtship and knowing that now you're together.
That's right.
That'd be so exciting.
It was very exciting.
Oh, man.
Very exciting.
That's so neat.
And moving to Montana was very exciting for me.
Yeah.
Because that was a place that I'd always enjoyed, the West, and had never traveled really before, so this was very exciting to me.
Yeah. During your first decade, was there anything you guys kind of consciously decided that really set you guys up for success in your marriage? I mean, anything along those lines you felt like you were like, this was a good foundation we built?
You mentioned the first 10 years of our marriage.
Mm-hmm.
We lived in 14 different homes
Wow.
during that time because I remained with the military. We learned to adapt to a variety of situations.
Mm-hmm.
We learned to adjust to things we couldn't otherwise control. But at the same time, it was a very, very special time, too, because we were together and we were able to travel. Our first year, we were 139 miles from Glacier Park and about 200 miles from Yellowstone. And free on weekends, we got to enjoy the parks far more than we otherwise would. So that was a high point. And during the first 10 years, I mentioned the homes we lived in. Oftentimes when I was transferred to another base, we'd have to go into temporary housing and maybe a secondary temporary before we got to the final
Wow.
home that was our home for the time that we were there. And during those first 10 years, we lived in addition to Montana, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, Ladd Air Force Base in Anchorage or in Fairbanks, Alaska.
Oh, wow.
Elmendorf Air Force Base in Anchorage, Alaska, and Ellsworth Air Force Base in Rapid City, South Dakota. So we got traveling, great camping experiences, and a lot of fun times, along with the tougher times.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I would like to say the first probably 2-3 years of marriage I would call transitioning from leaving your own parental homes, although he had left earlier, but I was still pretty much attached to home because I was teaching school close to home. So the first couple 3 years were transitioning, and it was particularly unique for him because his mother was alone then, and so he kind of felt obligation to spend a lot of time with his mother when we did have vacations, and that was a good time because we were only a mile apart as far as our parental homes were, so we could easily do that. But then once we had our first child and began to have more children, our home became the center, and not that the visits back home weren't there, but they were probably few and farther between, and we didn't feel quite as obligated as we did to transition from our parental homes to our own home.
Mm-hmm.
And as Ardys mentioned, this transition period, I'm sure it was somewhere around 3 years before we really became a unit in our own, and felt our obligations and responsibilities were to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a welcome change and a good change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You had mentioned children. I have 4 children. Do you have any encouragement for parents with young children? I'd say under 10. You know, what is? Do you have any?
Oh my! It's a tough time, and sometimes you think it'll never end. But I would say enjoy every day because it goes incredibly fast.
Mm-hmm.
And there are definitely challenges for people raising children nowadays that we didn't have. But I totally enjoyed being a mother. I was a stay-at-home mother. I didn't have to work outside the home, for which I'm very thankful. And I would just, I guess, say enjoy every day, the hard times as well as the easier times, and do fun things with your kids, and see where their interests lie, and try and support them in every way that it's possible to do. And even at a young age, that's pretty easy to see what they like to do. Mm-hmm. I like to play with them. I get down on the floor and play with them, and just really enjoyed spending time with them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ardys was a great mother, took great care of the kids, and they loved her. And yet we kind of learned that for her to be in charge of the kids all day was a strain. And I made it a point when I did get home 4 or 5 o'clock, the kids were mine. I could take over, and she would not have to worry about them. And she was still their mom, and she still fed them. But I was free and available, usually until bedtime, to help.
Yeah.
And that was a big relief for me, a big load off my shoulder, because somebody else was responsible at that point, and gave me a chance to cook dinner, and we tried to maintain a schedule, get the kids to bed at a reasonable hour, and so we had our evenings, didn't always work that way, but basically we tried to maintain a pretty decent bedtime hour.
Yeah, it's teamwork.
Teamwork.
Yeah.
Teamwork is right.
Mm-hmm. What encouragement do you have with parents that have during the teenage years, kids with in the teens?
That's a time that I think we'd have to think about a little bit.
Oh, sure.
When they become active in sports, it's a little tougher to control the patterns that you set up at home. For the most part, we always were able to have our meals together.
Mm-hmm.
We arranged for that. And we tried to encourage them. Moving as we did, they were probably less involved in school athletics than they otherwise would have been, but they were involved, the boys were involved with Scouts, and well, our daughter was involved with Girl Scouts too.
Mm-hmm.
So there were camping trips and outings, and there was leadership that needed, which I could be available for. So remembering back, I think the one thing we did that I look back on with a certain really satisfaction was that we were available for them and part of their scouting activities and part of their camping activities too. So that it was more of a family outing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think we've always heard that as teenagers, of course, they want more freedom, and you kind of want to hold back, and it's kind of like flying a kite. You let out the string a little bit at a time, and that was kind of a good advice. You analyze what they want to do, and think, is this a good thing to do, and allow certain privileges as you feel they're ready for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's a hard time, and even more so now, as I say, the culture has changed so much, and there's a lot more temptations out there. Probably they've always been there, but more nowadays than there were when we were raising our children.
Yeah.
We always put priority on our church. In all of our moves, we always sought out a Bible-believing church. We enrolled the children in Sunday school, and we had devotions at home, and read the Bible and prayed with them before they went to sleep in the night. And as they got older, of course, they did more of that on their own, but church was always a priority in our family, and we were very fortunate. They stuck with it all through high school, teenage years, and high school, and then on to college after that, and then they have to be prepared so they're on their own to do what hopefully we have instilled in them and laid the foundation for.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the other things that just sitting here thinking back, I was 1 month short of my 25th birthday before I had enough money to buy a car. And that was 6 months short of our wedding day. But when the kids came along, at age 15 and 16, I was teaching drivers training to the kids. Some of them had driver's education, some of them did not. So that was a new chapter in our lives. And then before they left the teenage years, they owned their own cars, which was certainly different than when I grew up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Here's some questions from people asked me to ask you. So these are a lot of my questions. So I'm gonna regarding like your household, running the household. Did you guys have certain roles to kind of keep family in the house kind of in tip-top shape? So kind of like what you alluded to when you came back from work, you'd watch the kids, but what about like kids' roles, your role, things like that, like chores and things along those lines?
I would just reflect a little bit on our growing up years. Ardys grew up in a family where there were 4 girls and 1 boy.
Uh-huh.
The boy and the father did nothing in the house. It was all up to the girls. I grew up in a family where my older brother kind of worked with my dad, and I was assigned to house chores mostly. And when I was married, I thought, well, I can be a great help in the kitchen. I'll try to help out as much as I can. It took me 20 minutes to find out that Ardys was in charge of the kitchen and loved it and liked to do it by herself. And I tell you, I found a sofa to sit on, and I couldn't have been happier.
We did have the division of labor. The house was my domain, and the garage and the yard were his domain, and I was perfectly content with that. I was more the inside type person, and he was definitely the outdoor type person.
And that is important too. And when decisions are made, we found out that if it's a household decision with furniture, she was the one who chose or should choose.
Yeah.
And when it came to automobiles and because of being in the military, assignments, I had little control over that, and she had little control, but she was very accepting of what came next.
Yeah.
And so there were divisions, and it worked very, very well for us. Skills that she had, she took control of, and skills that I had, it was easy for me to do.
Yeah. That's really great teamwork, and yeah, that's really good to recognize and what you enjoy as well. And if you enjoy certain tasks, it doesn't feel as much work,
That's right.
Too.
It was a pleasure.
So, over the years, how did you guys maintain and keep the romance alive? Or like the excitement, just the love,
Well, we both enjoy the same things, I think. So our vacations were always things that we enjoyed doing together, and there was just not necessarily romance, but adventure.
Yeah.
We like adventure, and we always looked forward to our summer vacations when we went home to visit our parents, and always living away in some other place, we could explore and adventure in that area at the time that we were working, and weekends and short vacations, and then our summers were spent with our parents. But we're not the type that have to go out to dinner. We're not the type that have to do a lot of fancy things. So we just enjoyed the common things, the pleasant, simple things of life. And that seemed to keep our romance pretty important and pretty active.
And just to add to that a little bit, I have the feeling that with each passing year, we just grew closer and closer together, and that kept up and has kept up. And it's tougher to be apart now for just a few hours. So love does grow, and it's been a blessing for us, and I think the Lord Himself has been there, and love. When our children came along, it didn't deplete the love we had for each other, but we had abundant love to share with the children, and life can be a wonderful passage if there's love.
That's wonderful. How, during some difficult times of just life, just normal life things, how did you guys stay unified and just stay close during those times, whether it's just normal challenges like disappointments, maybe you didn't want to move at times but you had to move, things like that. So how did you guys stay encouraged through the ups and downs of life in general?
I think we were given the opportunity and the ability to go with the flow a little bit, because in the military you do not have a choice oftentimes.
Oh, sure.
And the other thing we learned early on is that a transfer for me might not enable the family to move with me. Oftentimes, for instance, when I first went to Alaska, it was in January, and I was told there is no housing. So arrange for housing stateside until you have it arranged. And that particular time was a sad time for both of us, because I had moved the family from Ohio to Minnesota, where our family was.
Oh, yeah.
And during the move, our one son, our only child at that time, got very, very sick.
Oh, wow.
And took him to the doctor there when we arrived in Alexandria, and he was he was hospitalized, and dehydration was at the heart of it all. But then he was less than 2 years old. He laid in the bed, and I was up the night before I left. He had the IV in his leg, and I remember standing by his bedside, holding that so it wouldn't come out all night long. And then the next day was a day that we had many things to do together prior to my leaving. And when I got on the train that night to begin my passage, he was still in the hospital.
Oh, wow.
And I left Ardys there with our son. And that was probably the toughest time.
That was
we
a
ever
tough
had.
time.
Oh, wow.
That was a very tough time.
But
We did have trials. We had ups and downs, but the Lord was so good. We prayed him through, and he came out of it, and we were available then. We were living near home. We had our own place, but we were living near our parental homes, so we had support from both sides of the family, and that was wonderful.
And kind of a follow-up on that particular separation, it was way out in May before I was able to get the housing and get them up. And the 747 or the 707s were new planes to fly then.
Oh, wow.
And the Fairbanks airport could not handle a 707, so they were landing at Ladd Air Force Base. And I would go down at 5 o'clock every evening to watch the planes come in, knowing that they'd be on the plane a week or two later. Make sure that the landing was adequate and everything was going well. And when the day arrived, it was a happy time.
It was a happy time. He was old enough to know that he was missing his daddy.
Oh, man, yeah. So we kind of talked about this some regarding your faith. How has your faith shaped your marriage through all these years?
Bottom line, I accepted Christ when I was a little girl, and so I just had the Lord with me all the time, and it carried over into our marriage, our morals, our convictions. So our marriage has been built on our faith, and the reading of the Word and attending church, being involved in church from various times. So without the Lord, I don't think we'd be where we are today.
My own experience was that growing up, I was usually sent with my older brother to Sunday school. We'd stay for church and Bible school, I remember, and events like that. In a small town, we could walk. We didn't have to. No car ever took us. My folks came to church when they were available and free to come, and the learning I got was foundational for what happened later on. I knew that Jesus was the Son of God. He had been born, and I knew the basics, but in my own thinking, I had no security. I thought if I were to die today, if God were in a good mood, he'd say, "Come on over." If he were in a bad mood, I'd go the other way. And I was 23 years old before I finally discovered the love of God, the grace of God, and the forgiveness, and what a change. And that was a year and a half before we were married. So she knew that I lacked that confidence during the time we were dating, and something we didn't really talk about, but it would have been an obstacle probably had God not revealed himself to me in just a way that I'll marvel at the rest of my life.
Yeah, and I just think about, it's in any close relationship, it's like to know like forgiveness, when you know the forgiveness of God, and how we're so undeserving of that. It's you can forgive your spouse, if you understand God's grace.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
And forgiveness is a big part of marriage.
Yeah.
Definitely a big part of marriage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, but I didn't realize that he was struggling though with this with this salvation issue.
Security.
I could see a difference in the two churches where we attended. I always felt that our church was bring you to a personal relationship with the Lord, and in his church, it was all taught, but there was never that opportunity to really commit to a personal relationship with Christ. And I saw a difference there, but I didn't think it impacted our marriage because I didn't realize he was struggling with that issue. Because I'd seen him going to church all his life, and even though it was a different church, I just felt like he was understanding the scriptures at that point and understanding God's forgiveness and God's grace. But God has his own way of bringing people to himself, and it was very very remarkable when circumstances brought him to that point. So
that's really neat. Can you we're going to kind of wrap this up. Let's share a few last highlights. So you'll be married for 65 years coming June 19th. It'll be 65 years, and I had to look this up. You're a Diamond Club member. They say that anything over 60 years is your Diamond anniversary, so you're past that. So that's really neat. So how many? We didn't really talk about this much, but how many children do you have?
We have four
children, and then how many grandkids?
20 grandchildren.
20, and then any great grandchildren yet? One. Oh, that's so deep.
So we've come full circle almost.
Yeah. One thing that was really neat for me a few months ago when we were visiting, I was just talking to Myron, and you're in another room just talking to one of your grandchildren on the phone. So that really touched me. It's just really neat how you're staying in contact, and it's just neat that heritage and that that love and of the family.
We've had wonderful times with our grandchildren, especially those that live close and those that live far away. We tried as much as we could to go see them and have them come see us. And I love to keep in touch with the grandkids. I love young people, and I just love to hear what they're doing and keep up on their activities. And so we do have a good relationship.
It's so neat. I mean, it was just, you could tell. I mean, you're just talking, but just the back and forth, and it was just a very lively and fun conversation that I could
Ardys has a great communication skill, and with a couple of the grandkids, they respond in kind. And she devotes more than a week or an hour a week for a couple of them just to counsel them on the phone and to listen to them. And the others are great too. We stay in touch with all of them.
What's really neat too, just through this conversation, just being available. And that's something too. You're available for your grandkids now, and when you're raising your kids, being available to them too, and that's
important.
Yeah, it's very important. And it's, I think, one thing you allude to nowadays compared to the past. Nowadays, there's just so many distractions that are just so readily in your face, and I think my wife and I were just realizing we have to be very intentional and say no to a lot of things that are just in our face on our phones, and
that's the big difference that we see from the generation, and this is happening more and more, as we see the culture going the other way, and we see a huge difference from the time that we raised our kids and even our grandkids to now this generation. So
but there's a lot of timeless things that you're sharing. Just just love your spouse, be adaptable through life experiences, and understand forgiveness that you find in Christ, and then also just being available for your kids. And I think as parents, it's just technology is such a blessing to stay in contact with people, but you have to be a lot more intentional. And for my wife and I, that's a lot of our hard work, is just to put stuff away and out of our face so that we have the time to get down and play dolls, with their daughters and
have tea parties and all those fun things that little children love.
Mm-hmm.
But as grandparents, we've found that we probably have more time to spend with our grandkids than we did with our own children at that time in life. So it has been a blessing for us too to have that. And as they grow older, they get busy with other things, and sometimes when we're having a conversation, it looks like they're looking right through you.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But they're great. We love them all, and they're all doing well.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. So, what a privilege it is to sit down and talk to you today, and thank you so much. It's pretty amazing, like what we said, 65 years of marriage, 4 children, 20 grandchildren, 1 great grandchild. I mean, what a neat thing.
We are blessed. We are indeed blessed.
And reflecting back, it gets better every year. We're closer and enjoying life.
Yes, very much.
Yeah, so thank you so much.
You're welcome.